All right, it's time to start. It's 2:30 Central European Time. I'm seeing people who are connecting the room, so welcome to this room. Welcome to the webinar today. Today is a Skillman webinar on impact of digital teaching and learning on teachers' profession. And welcome to attend from wherever you are. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And yes, so we are here today with the European Training Foundation. We have a long-standing partnership that goes along with the European Training Foundation on the organization of these webinars. Today, we are very delighted to have a few speakers that I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. Just quick instructions about the microphones and cameras. So for now, all the participants have their cameras switched off. Same for the microphones. We will have two presentations from two experts from the European Training Foundation. And then after that, we will have a Q&A session. During that time, we will have an interactive space for you to ask questions and to add comments. And before that, you can throw your questions and comments at any time in the chat box. So feel free to ask whatever you want in the chat box. Let's take advantage of these two international experts that we have on DTL today. So please ask as many questions as you want and interact as much as you want. Okay, so as usual, my name is Valentina. I am the communication manager of Skillman, and I'm delighted today to be with you and with our international speakers that I want to thank very much for being with us and sharing their expertise with the audience. The first speaker will be Filippo Del Nino. He's a specialist in vet policies and systems from the European Training Foundation, and he's gonna share with us how digitalization reforms affect teaching and learning processes. After him, an expert in digitalization, Fabio Nascimbeni, human capital development expert from the European Training Foundation. So he's going to illustrate the challenges of applying digital teaching and learning and understand what are the competencies required by teachers in this process. Again, after their presentation, we will have a space for interaction, and you will be able to, I will be able to address the questions to the speakers, or if you want, you can raise your hands and you can ask the questions directly to them. Moving on, as I already explained, we have a partnership with the European Training Foundation in the organization of these technical webinars. So this is actually the 40th webinar that we've been hosting in the last year. So it's a big achievement. We as Skillman are an international network of a number of stakeholders around the world. Skillman aims at introducing and exchanging skills, and we are very active also with our partnered organizations in the organization of many activities. We have more than 600 members coming from 93 countries in the world, 50 plus ambassadors. We have set up some focus groups that regularly meet to talk about TVET related topics, and of course our main audience are TVET experts, TVET providers, policymakers, industries in schools and other individuals, and these are the main achievements that we have achieved in the past year, and I just wanted to share them with you because for us these are very important milestones, and I'll leave it for you later. From my point of view, I would just like to forward you an invitation to our biggest annual event, which is called the Skillman International Forum. We're currently working on it. The event is going to be hosted as a hybrid format. So some activities are going to be hosted online and some activities are going to be hosted on site. This year's main locations for the event are going to be Bologna in Italy and Lisbon in Portugal. So I forwarded the invitation because also there's a chance of getting a grant to attend the on-site and physical activities, getting financed, so getting the grant from the European Commission. The event is going to be hosted from the 15th till the 18th of November, so in just a month. And this year we have three main topics. The first is digital and green revolution, then micro-credentials, and sharing is caring, namely social inclusion and ethical skills. Another important activity that we do as Skillman is the peer learning clubs. So these are groups of experts that we have set up in this past year that are meeting regularly online, or it happened also on site. And basically they get together to tackle 4 different topics, all related to TVET. The first one is about advanced manufacturing, the second advocacy and policy influencing, the third group is about work-based learning, and the fourth is train the trainers. And of course, the topics of today's webinar are going to be addressed also during these meetings of these groups. So Luca, in the chat, please share the link of if anyone is interested, you can join anytime one or even more of these groups. Also, I would like to remind all of you that we are streaming live. So if you want to watch us live, please Skillman.eu /live, very easy. But again, my colleague is sharing the link. And also, as always, we would like to collect some feedbacks from you, because your feedback is very valuable to us to improve in the future. So you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen and just do a quick feedback form, or click in the link in the box, in the chat box, to fill the evaluation form. Given that, I would just wouldn't indulge any further and give the word to our first presenter, as I already introduced, Filippo Del Nino, a specialist in embed policies and systems at the European Training Foundation. Good afternoon, Filippo. Thank you for being with us. If you want, the floor is all yours.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, go on.
Can you see my screen?
Very well, yes.
Thank you very much. So today we have 2 presentations from the ETF. The first is mine. It's going to be shorter. It's going to be less interesting. It's going to be more on the pessimistic side of the introduction of digitalization in education, in the sense that we'll try to identify the challenges that actually are posed to teachers in particular when you try to review how you run things in school and you introduce digitalization in terms of how you run things and what you actually teach to students. Fabio, on the other way around, we will actually look at the opportunities that teachers have in actually improving the quality of what they teach through digitalization tools and approaches. Oh my God. Eccoci. So just a quick slide to understand how we got here. So this is about digitalization reforms in education. We clearly identify 3 main phases. One, which was pre-COVID. That's basically 25, 30 years of trying to introduce digitalization in education context. In some cases, of course, there's been a lot of positive examples in universities in more informal context. But when we talk about general education or compulsory education, these attempts mainly focus on pilots with schools who represented excellence and with big funds, because these pilots were usually funded by donors. So this is actually what happened until the pandemic crisis. With the pandemic crisis, you had what we call a massive unsolicited learning experience, because we didn't want it, but they forced education system to react to a situation where distance education and online solutions were mandatory. So we had a systemic approach. So all students were affected. There was no time for preparing, and there were little resources. There were no resources allocated to it, at least in the first year. Then they try to allocate resources on the fly, but in general, I consider the number of students and schools involved, the resources for distance and digital education were very, very much limited. And then we have a new phase now. It's basically most governments, if not all of governments affected by COVID, have basically on the success, on the wave of the success of managing education during COVID, they basically launched a number of new policies for the introduction of digitalization in compulsory education. So they basically have developed new tools during the pandemic crisis. They have a better understanding of what works and what doesn't work, but they still have little resources, because when we talk about systemic level, that means a huge number of students, a huge number of teachers, and a huge number of schools to be dealt with. A specific comment on the stakeholders. I mean, it's important for us to understand that when we talk about digitalization in education, it's mainly about teachers and students. There are many actors involved. It's very much important that these actors are part of the discussion, the families, the directors, the ministries, of course, even the employers, but the core of the educational process in terms of introducing digitalization in education is, and always will be, teachers and students. Now, for me, what is very important is to make the audience understand that this passage from the pandemic to real systemic change in relation to the introduction of digitalization in education is not linear at all. I mean, the two contexts are completely different. So it looks like a sort of continuation. We were doing well, we'll now do much more. In reality, I mean, if you pick up several elements, you'll see that there was clear different type of pressure and different type of objectives between dealing with digitalization in the pandemic crisis and introducing a systemic level. So the first is that during pandemic crisis, the system was reacting. So with the objective of not leaving anyone behind. And that's something that schools and educational systems do very well, because teachers care about students, and because educational systems are structured to actually push students through the system. So they are good in it, okay? And that's why actually we had, in most countries, at least in all countries I've been living or working with, a very positive performance from the educational system. When you go to system change and you discuss about digitalization, you go in a completely different direction, because you go in the direction of innovating on a regular basis. And that's not something natural for the educational system. If you think about innovation in a country, you don't immediately think about public sector. And if you think about public sector, the first stakeholder you don't think about is the educational system. So this is a radical change. So it doesn't come automatically out of their experience of the pandemic, but it is completely different approach. It means really setting up mechanisms for continuous innovation and review of the tools, review of what you teach, review of the competencies of teachers, review of the competence of the students. So this is a very complicated process. It doesn't come out easily, even if you had a positive experience in terms of actually digitalization and using of tools during the pandemic. The second element is, during the pandemic, the objective was to maintain standards. So we wanted to give students the same competence that they were having before the pandemic. So we just focused on, let's avoid the students lose years or the students get out with less competencies. When you go to systemic change, the objective is completely more ambitious. It's about raising standards, raising students' competences, higher competence or different competences. During the pandemic crisis, it was a time-bound experience. We knew that the crisis would have ended, and this means that we're basically waiting for going back to normal. I don't know, in other countries, in Italy, the discussion is, when do we go back to normal? When do we go back to students in classes? When do we go back to normal teaching? Okay. While in the system change, the long-term perspective is what is important. It's not only long-term, it's a sort of never-ending, because the digital aspect, it requires to adapt on a regular basis. It requires that you have a digital observatory which analyzes what are the evolving needs, the evolving tools, the new software. So it's something that you have to continue looked into it and maintained. Then you have the scope. During the pandemic crisis, it was mainly distance education. It was basically giving the same lessons that you were providing before live through Zoom or other softwares. So there was not really an approach in trying to integrate sophisticated e-learning methodologies. That's because of the fact that nobody was ready. Already the second year, for example, you saw a lot of improvements in schools, and in some cases of excellence, introducing real e-learning methodologies. But in general, it was more or less about providing typical front classes, front teaching classes. With this, in the context of a system change, of course, you have a much wider scope. So you have not only the ability to actually teach to students which are not in schools, so providing education also for people who have difficulties in accessing schools, but you also have the possibility of delivering different type of competences. So delivering different type of content in different ways. As it concerns the content, as just as I mentioned, I mean, before it was exactly the same content. During the pandemic crisis, you had the same curricula. Well, if you want to go in an effective introduction of digitalization in education, you're going to have changes in content. Changes in the content in the same traditional subject, but also introduce introduction of new content, which could be, for example, coding, or could be other aspects of IT literacy. So this is particularly important because it does affect teachers, because when you introduce new content, they don't usually introduce new teachers. So they usually pass the new requirements to the existing teachers. Now, we've tried to also identify which are the areas of teachers' work that are more affected by digitalization. The first, of course, is how to actually revise the content of the programs. So it's just developing new teaching materials based on digital technologies. Then you have new digital content. I made examples, for example, of coding, which means that this can up on the desk of teachers of specific subjects. So this is something that have to learn how to teach. Then you have digital as a key competence. This is particularly ambitious and advanced approach, where you actually assess competences of students in relation to transversal competences. So these are not subjects. This is a number of competences that students should learn through what they actually learn in the non-traditional subjects. And this is a quite innovative approach that is starting in Europe and started to be introduced in many countries, but is particularly complex. Particularly complex because you have to assess these competences. You have to make sure that you actually teach this competence to students, and you try to understand what do I do with students who don't have the digital competence, the digital key competence. Then you have digital assessment. This is a big opportunity to do things differently. You may have different ways of assessing students through digital means. I go quickly because Fabio will go probably more in detail. You may have, for example, e-portfolios of products delivered by students, which they actually produce on their own, their code, and then they send to the teachers. There are really quite a number of possibilities for students through of being assessed differently. But this is quite challenging for teachers because it's all new for them. Digital learning pedagogy, this is, of course, is crucial. I mean, this basically means do not actually deliver the same identical lessons just through a video experience, but introduce completely new set of tools. And then you have digital learning environments, which basically refer to the e-learning platform, the learning management platform that have been bought or used by schools through the pandemic, and that they offer a number of possibilities that should be exploited fully by teachers in case you really go to a systemic change in terms of digitalization. Transversally, you have teachers and student competence. This is the most important aspect of all. It means that you may define digitalization strategy, and you may introduce changes only to the point where the teachers and student competence are at the right level. It's pointless to buy equipment that teachers cannot use. It's pointless to set targets the students cannot achieve. So understanding what can be teachers and students' competence in a new framework is crucial. And the point is that this assessment is something you have to do on a continuous basis. because the highest is the level of students' competences that they get, for example, from primary to secondary education, and the more advanced and sophisticated can be the teaching that teachers provide in secondary education. So you need to set new targets on a regular basis, and you need to keep on evaluating and assessing these competences so that you know how much you can push further in the coming 5 years, for example. So it's not really introducing a new subject, which remains the same for 30 years. It's really a continuous process of understanding what should be taught, what are the teachers' competences that are required, and what are the targets for students. And this is something that you have to do on a regular basis. And the final element that I would like to introduce is really the main dilemma. I mean, very big number of research have been committed during the pandemic about, okay, what is the impact in terms of social inclusion, in terms of equity of education in the by the introduction of digital education and distance education. And all studies demonstrated that if you don't do anything about it, the system will be much less fair to students who have economic difficulties, learning difficulties, and so on. So it is a big dilemma. How much can you innovate without increasing the social exclusion of part of the student's body? So this is something that in all policies has to be very much taken in consideration, and it also affects how teachers teach and to what extent they can actually push in terms of complexity of their methodologies. But I really look forward to give the floor to Fabio. We will have question and answers at the end of Fabio's presentation. You may ask all sorts of questions from the more practical to the ones who refer to policy developments, and we will be there for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Filippo. Thank you very much. I see someone is having some issues in seeing the screen. I saw it full screen, but if you still have these issues, please inform us in the chat, and let's see if we can do something about it. I hope it's not the case, though, with our second speaker, Filippo. Filippo, you were already well introduced. If you, the floor is all yours. If you can, let's see if the screen is visible to all and it's big enough. Let's see.
Yes, so let me try. So let me see. Is it visible now? Big enough?
Try to put it in a slideshow mode.
It is for me.
Presentation mode.
This is, I can put it like this.
Yes.
Better now? Okay. So good afternoon or good morning. Actually, I see some people from different parts of the world. So good to be here with you. And thank you, Filippo and the others for the introduction, and looking forward to this actually conversation I would like to have. So first of all, happy Teachers' Day. Since we're talking about teachers, yesterday was the World Teachers' Day. So I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that we are talking about something urgent and very important for our future generation. So in many cases, again, as Filippo was saying, the debate is about how innovative, which technology. Actually, here we are talking about getting people educated, getting people included, and teachers obviously are at the center of that. So actually, it's good that UNESCO and many other organizations are celebrating this day for teachers at least once per year. Now, summarizing a bit what Filippo has been saying, actually, I'm bringing you a few results coming mostly from research and some tips and ideas, and I'll be talking to you as if you were teachers. So if some of you are not teachers, please bear in mind that these words might be then transferred to some people you work with. But let's say I'm sort of imagining that I have some teachers in front of me and teachers managers, actually. So basically, to make it short, we have clearly new challenges. We have been having challenges with the introduction of technology for many years, but now COVID has shown all the potential and all the weaknesses. So clearly we have new challenges. So the first one, possibly the main one, is that Online teaching and digital teaching needs new pedagogy. So the DOL pedagogy that Filippo was showing before, it is proven by research that if you use technology, especially if you use a lot of technology without new pedagogies, things don't really work. Second, teachers need support and the students need support. Again, what Filippo was saying before, this is not something where you introduce technology, even if you do it wisely. People need to be supported in the process and need to be supported sort of continuously. Then, of course, we have an issue of infrastructure that sometimes when we talk about pedagogies, when we talk about education, risks to be forgotten, because this is not typically Minister of Education responsibility, but still in many countries, I would say in all countries, we still have infrastructure issues, and not only telecommunication. I'm thinking also about specific technical issues, for example, for disabled people. So there are a number of problems there. And finally, a rather new thing which COVID brought to the scene is the social isolation of teachers and of students when working at a distance, which is also something that should be taken into account. Luckily, COVID has also shown some new, I would say, success factors, things that seems to be always there or almost always there in successful distance digital experiences of teaching and learning. So the first seems to be obvious and a bit out of the box, but it's enthusiasm. So actually, good digital teachers are typical teachers who are enthusiastic about using technology for teaching. And this is not, again, something obvious. You need to really enter into the world of digital teaching to appreciate it and to see all the potential. So some level of enthusiasm is needed. A second thing is important to be able to manage expectations and to know that what we are doing with digital technology when teaching, when talking to an audience, when working with people in the workplace, it will never be exactly like without technology. So we need to make sure that the different expectations of the different people we are talking to, not only the students, but most of the students, are actually taken into account. And then, of course, one thing that digital technology can help doing is to create a sense of community, especially beyond the classroom. So this is something that we've seen a lot through COVID, the fact that what before happened at the classroom level, when educators were able to do it, also helped connecting different classrooms and different groups. And this has created a large sense of community, which actually is helping a lot, not only in learning new things, but in learning in a more inclusive way. And then we have the importance of using different media, so to be able to variate the kind of media that we use and to play between synchronous and asynchronous methods and moments. Again, this is not something easy. We'll see in a moment the importance of design. And finally, as Filippo was saying, let's say the fact that assessment came back in the central scene of pedagogy, because now with technology we can really do new things. And so assessment has often been the Cinderella of innovation in teaching and learning, because it's not something easy to innovate for a number of reasons. Now we see a bit more things happening in terms of new things. And finally, most important, especially for VET, is the relevance to the real world. In most of the slides, I'm leaving you some links and some references. So this is so you can go back and check better about the thing I'm saying. Now, are we talking about a teacher, an educator that should be able to do all of this? So play with digital tools, manage expectations, be fluent in digital literacy, be able to take digital risks. You know, what if now my connectivity goes down? You know, I'll be talking to myself and the whole webinar will be problematic. So this is a digital risk, but not only this. You know, digital pedagogies and a new role. So are we thinking about a new educator? So and this is somehow increasing the stress that educators, especially in the VET field, but not only, are actually normally facing. And actually here, my point is that there are a number of approaches, a number of tools, and especially a number of positive dynamics that are showing us that if properly tackled, these different questions and different issues can actually bring teaching to a different level, to a much better level. Now, first of all, let's talk competencies. Now, what does that guy with all the question marks in front of him need to be able to do in order to be a digitally ready, a digitally savvy educator? Now, the European Commission came up following many consultations with experts with this competence framework, which you might know. It's called Competencies. And actually, apart from the details, and you can check the website for more details, I think the most interesting part of this framework is that it clearly opens up, apart from the central pedagogical set of competencies in terms of teaching and learning, resources, assessment, and empowering and engaging learners, two lateral things. The first one is the professional engagement of teachers. So a digital competent teacher need also to be digital and digitally savvy outside the classroom. And especially, he should be able to teach also by example to his students. This is on the right side. This means that you cannot actually teach about open content and open educational resources if you're not using them properly, if you're using copyrighted licenses. You should be able to also teach, and to teach by example in the way you use technology when you're talking to your students. And as you can see there, we're talking about digital competencies, transversal, subject-specific competence. So this is roughly taking into account, let's say, trying to design a profile of a digital competent teacher. This is not the only one. Actually, there are more. EPICT is a rather interesting experience, actually pretty strong in Italy. I've put there the Italian website, but from there you can reach also the international website. There is an EPICT in India. I saw that we had some Indian speakers before. And on the right side, you see one, I think one of the first, possibly the first international ICT competence framework for teachers by UNESCO. I think this goes back to 2010, something like that. And actually, as you can see there, the areas of competencies are more or less the same. And these are all the areas that Filippo was mentioning before: curriculum, pedagogy, digital skills, again, very important, the organization, so the leadership and the incentives, and again, the professional learning of teachers. So I would say that there is a sort of an agreement on which competencies we are talking about. Of course, these are frameworks, so these are indications, and they should be, of course, adapted and should be thought, let's say, rethought depending on the different countries and contexts. But this is happening actually in Europe and also in many other countries. These frameworks are being used. Now, having said that, competencies are more or less clear, at least what we are talking about. Let's see if we can discuss some tips and some new ideas. Now, I will talk about design, just one slide, learning spaces, learners' involvement, co-creation. These are the four things, not the only four things, but I think four areas where actually research is telling us that a lot of change is happening. So first of all, and this is a graph by Diane Lauriard, 2012. So it's almost 10 years ago, much before COVID. And this is basically saying that when you design your course in both in an online and in a non-offline setting, you should take into account the learning process, and you should start by the learners. Now, this is the classical first principle of good design, but if you apply this principle and this mini framework actually to innovative design in digital settings, you will see that the whole thing changes. You will see that this gets much more interesting, and actually you avoid to incur into many design mistakes that can happen. When we talk about design, it's also important to think that today we are often designing both for online and for campus or school education. So it's pretty difficult to start designing something which can work both for students in the school, half of them, and half of them are studying from home, learning from home, listening from home. So this is something which is, again, being researched quite a lot. Another thing is the fact that more often teachers and educators are not alone, but they design and work in teams, not only among teachers of different subjects and specialties, but also with other professionalities, so educational technologists, we have designers, librarians, and so on, instructional designers as well. And this is something, again, which not all school can afford, of course, but it's something that is enriching a lot the design. Now, digital skills should not be something that we add to a course, but should be something that we actually design from the very beginning. So it's the classical question when you are thinking, when you're starting a course, you ask yourself, normally, which platform should we be using? No, that's actually the last question. You should start from who are my learners? Which are the competencies of my learners? What would make them feel comfortable when working with technology? What would be the problem when working with technology? And typically these questions are posed not so much by the educator, but by all these other professionals that you see there. Again, very important, the support structures. So this means that is not only the educator and the students, sometimes mediated by an online space, but you have family, as Filippo was saying, since this can take place from home many times. You have school, you have the community, you might have the internet cafe, you might have different kind of networks. So it's important to look at a digital learning experience not only as a course as if it would be in the classroom, because this opens up many other opportunities in terms of other support structures. Again, as I was saying, so libraries, community centers, which are very, very common actually, especially in developing and transition countries. It's not uncommon to see people learning from a community center or from a bar. This is perfectly legitimate, but it should be taken into account when designing in view of a resilient course. Now, this is one of my favorite slides because actually it shows you that educators now have often to do with networked students. Now, networked students meaning students which don't work only in physical space, they don't learn only in physical space, and they are used to learn as well in bounded online spaces, so typically the learning management system or the website or the Moodle of the school. And this is quite normal because these are still closed spaces. Now, whether it is a classroom or it is an online space, the dynamics change a bit, but actually not so much. You have a password to go in, you have a badge to enter the school, you have somebody in charge who is the teacher, who decides more or less about the curriculum, who guides the discussion. So if you think about the differences between physical and online bounded spaces, that's not really different. What really changes is when educators and students interact in open online spaces. Now, this is a completely different story. Now, open online spaces, we are talking about massive open online courses, we are talking about fora, we are talking about Wikipedia, we are talking about any online space that is where what you do is visible to everybody. And this is not minor, because if you are working outside your comfort zone of the classroom, both the student and the teacher have to learn have to use new competencies, and especially have to put in place new attitudes. So, for example, the decision of sharing something you have produced is not an obvious decision. You are sharing this with whom? Are you sharing this with, somebody, with a group of people, with somebody else? So this is something which is actually, again, pretty not obvious, actually. So open online spaces are actually one of the areas where we are seeing actually a lot of innovation taking place and where also a lot of research is happening. Now, most of the spaces we are talking about are blended, as I was saying before. So now, when we talk about blended spaces, we need to think that typically a digital course, a digital learning experience is composed by different moments, mainly by synchronous moments together with asynchronous moments. Now, how to blend these is actually how to blend a good whiskey or a good pasta dish. So you can do it in many ways, but doing it with the right mix is not so easy. And it's not so easy to put things in order, not so easy to learn while you're doing that. And so it is important to know what you can do and to test, to try, of course, different options. Now, when you talk about synchronous learning spaces, we talk about what we're doing now. So now you're listening to me, and hopefully you will be asking me questions soon. So this is Zoom, you have Teams, you have many other platforms like that. But we also talk about chat rooms. Chat room, I mean, a synchronous meeting can go on for 6 hours. You have any kind of different experiences, you know, around the globe. You have meetings that go on for 6 hours. People go there, they see what the others have been doing, and they contribute, and so on. So a chat room can also be a good idea. But again, somebody is excluded for this from these experiences typically. So this is also something that needs to be taken into account. If we move to asynchronous learning, of course, you have different options. You have discussion fora, collaborative documents, storyboards, mind maps, and all these things are very powerful. First of all, because everyone can contribute. And second, because everybody can contribute at their own pace and by putting in their own learning preferences. So imagine you have two extreme kind of people. You know, the teacher is asking to contribute with one sentence to a discussion. Now, people will never do this in a Zoom meeting because they are shy. They don't want to do it, like in the classroom. And this is legitimate. Now, if you do it through a Google Doc, for example, in an asynchronous way, people will write a sentence straight away. People will take half an hour to think about it. That's not the thing. By doing that, everybody can contribute. So I'm not saying that this is better on its own, but also that thinking that just meeting synchronously through webinars and so on is enough, that is also something that needs to be questioned somehow. Now I will one more and then I will stop if we have questions. This is also something very important, and research is telling us more and more that this new wave of digital teaching is actually contributing to get students more involved. Now, what you can do, what can a teacher do when working through technology in terms of students' engagement and involvement? First, you can check how teachers are doing, how our students are doing. This means you can be in front of 20 to 200 students, and actually, in most cases, you can have a feeling actually grounded on data of what they are doing, on how they are proceeding, almost in real time. And this helps you because you can clearly understand where you should need to put more support. You can understand if what you are saying is being understood by students and so on. So this is also, this is fundamental to get them involved. Later on, we might try this, a brainstorming in a chat. Again, chats are something which typically people neglect because they're super simple. You know, it's like SMS, but actually they are very powerful. So this thing is called Chatfall, and we might try it later on if we have time. So it's about writing an answer to a question in a chat and then pushing enter, so send message all together. And this is actually showing a sort of a fall, like a waterfall, which is something super simple, but can help breaking the ice, can help actually having mini brainstorming moments, and can also check what people are doing, what students are doing. So at the moment, I don't know if you're listening to me, if you're doing something else. So there is also this distance that actually it's possible to close with some tips and technologies. You can have, of course, a whiteboard to collaborate to develop knowledge. You can have polls in Zoom. You can have interesting external tools for quizzes and so on, and many different tools. Here, the thing is, tools are not important. What is important is actually what you do with them and the way you consider the tools as well when you design a learning experience in a digital fashion, in a digital way. Now, quickly, in terms of low bandwidth, now I've seen that a number of you are listening from countries where bandwidth is still an issue. Actually, in Italy, in many regions in Italy, especially in the mountains, bandwidth is still an issue. And in some cases, bandwidth can be an issue also in cities and will be in the future. We're going to have breakdowns of internet more and more. So we need to be ready to use what I call frugal tools. So you can see there, and I put some of the links. You can have live chats, for example, through talk.io, which is a super simple website. It's like a Google, you just have a line, a place where you can just write and you create a chat with others by just putting in a single link. Super simple. It does only that one. You have many messaging tools like Signal, for example, that can help you actually keeping in touch with your students or working with your students in a very low bandwidth and low connectivity environment. Again, asynchronous interaction can help a lot. You have videos with text version that if you don't make it to access the video, you can at least read what is said in the video. This is good also for people which are, for example, disabled in one way or another. And especially, this is interesting, you can have a lot of e-learning platforms nowadays that are helping students to download materials, to work offline, and then to reply to the questions when they are back online. So you can work offline, then as soon as you connect again, everything is uploaded into the platform. Again, this is pretty important because COVID has shown that it is not only for the typically excluded people we can think of, but actually exclusion is around the corner also in our super developed cities and industrial economies. Again, collaborative notes and co-creation. Here, I guess we all know documents, online documents, suites like Google Drive or Meeting Words. This here, what is interesting here, or Google Slides or other, is not so much what they can do, is what they can do for teaching. Because actually, if you think about it, having an empty document that everybody can access before the classroom, for example, let's put there what you want, or how you would answer to a problem. During the classroom for a discussion, and after the classroom for a follow-up, is a super powerful tool. And this is a Google document. So it means it's free. Let's say you pay with your data, but it's still free to access. And it's something which many teachers of the past could not even dream of. This continuous flow before, during, and after the classroom moment. And again, this is super simple in terms of technology, super accessible, but rather powerful. And then I will just show you Padlet, an example, which this is one of many tools, but you can just see with one tool how many things you can do. So you can, use notes from the classroom work. You can use notes from online groups. So again, engaging with others. You can record lectures and put them there. You can use and share slides. You can have photos or links or videos or audio posted there, but especially posted there not only by the teacher, but posted there by the students and organized by the students. Now, Padlet, as many others, is free, at least free for until a certain number of pieces of content, but you can work with also with the free version. And so this to show you, like with a very simple tool, typically a whiteboard, you can really do many things which can strongly innovate your classroom work. I'll stop leaving you with this and asking you if you have some questions about these tips or these reflections point I provided now. I have a few more slides later, but I think we should stop for a moment not to overload people with content.
Thank you, Fabio. A lot of content, a lot of interesting and inspiring inputs. I hope that now we have a few questions to address you and Filippo. Filippo, if you want to help me with the process, you're more than welcome, and let's start with the discussions. Alternatively, you can also ask your questions directly by just clicking the button in the bottom bar, reactions, and then raise your hand. And if you do, I will turn on your microphone. We can start, Filippo.
Okay, we have our first questions. It's from Dr. Alan Majumdar. I hope I get the name pronounced correctly. Do you think that asynchronous teaching learning need to be taken as students' achievement in formal assessment? If so, how?
Well, in my understanding, it should be taken into account by a formal assessment. It depends how much you can innovate assessment, of course. The important thing is what you assess. If you assess the process, so in that case, it's important to know what the student is doing, where he's learning. But if you actually assess the competencies achieved by the student, this becomes much less important. So we know that our systems are quite rigid when it comes to assessment. But think, for example, of, now I'm talking, I will show you a couple of examples about a bit extreme examples later on. But think about what is called, there's a global movement about non-disposable assignments. Now, normally, when an educator is asking somebody to write an assignment, write an essay, the student writes this essay, and then the professor, the educator, the teacher is assessing it and then throws it away. No, it's done. The use is to understand that the learner knows how to do something. What if we ask the student to do something which is useful for the world or which is shareable? So contribute to a specific blog or to a specific Wikipedia page. Do it in the open. Now, in that case, actually, I don't really think teachers should care if this learning has taken place synchronously or asynchronously, because there, what gets really important is that this work by the student is actually contributing to something bigger. So I would say my answer to the how would be by trying to innovate assessment as much as possible, even in some radical ways.
Thanks. I have one. I mean, it's clear that there's huge potential to increase the quality of teaching, but if I am a teacher and I'm skeptical in terms of how long will this take me? Can I teach the same curriculum through these most advanced pedagogies and tools? What would be your questions? Should authorities review curricula to make sure that this type of pedagogies can be really implemented, or can you use this type of pedagogies and tools with the same curricula?
Well, this I think the picture in the slide now will answer to you. So we know that things cannot be fast, good, and cheap at the same time. Now, what we've seen in COVID, we've seen a lot of fast work. So governments needed to act fast, and in some cases, actually, they gave a lot of freedom to teachers, much more than before. So we've seen countries, I can think of Jordan, for example, where before it was very difficult to implement online learning in universities and high schools, and then it became obviously doable and encouraged. Now, I would say that to have something good and cheap, or at least good and not expensive, meaning sustainable, you need to forget the fast. So if we want, again, a proper change in the curriculum, not only in the curriculum content, but also in the curriculum structure. So especially for countries which have a very rigid curriculum, we need the process there. And this thing is happening in some places, especially if we think about the introduction of some soft skills. How do you introduce them? So when you introduce new sets of skills that need to be included in the curriculum, you can experiment a bit more, I would say. I don't personally see very much. I think you can teach the usual things in new ways. I don't think that in order to teach, that you need new things to teach. See what I mean? You can teach history of technology, if you talk about, a technology school, in new ways. You can just use videos. You can have students reflecting on it, on what you teach in new ways, even if the curriculum is exactly the same. Actually, what I think the flip side of your question is, what about new subjects? What about coding? Can you teach coding in an old way? Can you teach new things without having the, not only the capacity, but the understanding of what these things are and what they bring? And there the question, I think, is no. So to teach new digital society related things, you need to increase those teachers' capacity that you were showing, Filippo, on the top of your last thing, I think.
Okay, there are two questions. The first one is, who should ensure teachers are well prepared and supported to tackle these challenges so they can support the students, and how to keep a balance with the screen time and online fatigue when you have to develop your skills and also teach?
Well, this is the biggest question of all, in my understanding. I mean, the who depends a lot on the different systems. So in some, you have some successful cases where, for example, the overall teaching population of a country, I'm talking about Singapore, has been upskilled in terms of digital teaching. But that's easy because they have one place that is training all teachers of the country. So they have one teacher training institute, actually pretty good, very well funded, of course, but that's one way fits all. So now they can all teach, but they can all teach the same way, of course, in a rather, I would say, standardized society without a lot of cultural differences, without linguistic differences, and so on. Now you have many cases where things are much more complicated. You have more regional let's say systems, you have different languages, you have different teaching styles. So on the who, I would say it really depends. On how to keep the balance with screen times, I would say this is something that should be put on the teacher, in the sense that if a typical I would say mistake or a typical wrong step that one could take is to say, okay, we need to safeguard the well-being of teachers ourselves by making sure that they don't have to spend too much time in front of the screen and so on. I believe, and actually it's not only me, UNESCO and others are pushing in this direction, is that teachers should be responsibilized and should be able to know, they should become fluent, not only in digital tools. This is not the issue. Young teachers are already fluent. They should become fluent in digital society issues. They should know that well-being is not spending 9 hours in front of the computer, and they should find solutions also with the students. So we see a number of bounce backs, for example, after so many months of distance learning. We've seen, for example, in the north of Europe, classrooms are discovering the outside, they're going into the woods. So this is also normal. So I think among the many stresses that are put on teachers, this is one thing I would put on them. So teachers should be in charge of the digital well-being, provided they are trained. They understand what digital well-being means, which is not only screen time, but is many more things.
Then we have a nice questions, because at least for ETF, since we deal with that, I think this question is quite interesting. So can you elaborate with examples of using digital teaching learning to teaching practical skills effectively?
Okay, so when you mean practical skills, you mean?
I think it means skills that affect how you do things with your hands.
Okay.
If I'm correct, I'm asking Abdullah Marashid to correct if I'm wrong. But from my reading of the question is basically, if you're in vet school, you're supposed to do something physically. How do you actually integrate it in a digital teaching and learning environment?
Now this is an open point, a painful point actually, because it's clear that you have things that you need to do with your hands, the same thing as you have things that you need to do in collaboration with people in a face-to-face environment. So it's something that it's obvious that some things, especially the ones that need time to be learned, can be better learned without the mediation of technology. It is also true that for some specific cases, which are actually growing, technology can help. Think, for example, of dangerous, jobs related to dangerous situations, like things with dangerous materials or things like this. In those cases, for example, extended reality can help a lot. Now, extended reality, meaning virtual reality or augmented reality, can simply now be done through a phone. You don't actually need a lot of very expensive Oculus or big devices. Of course, you might have to have an investment at the beginning, but this is with all technologies, even if the prices are going down. But imagine if you have to teach people, for example, to repair to repair 5 kinds of cars. You cannot, or 15 kinds of cars. You cannot get 15 cars in your mechanical place. So what you can do there is to actually use not only a computer to show things behind the screen, but by using extended reality, you can actually transform one car into another. So you can look at the car through a computer and that car transforms. So things move because it's the computer, is the mobile is actually allowing you to work with different things. So actually, I would say that virtual reality, extended reality can help extending these things, but still, again, I would say that when it comes to really practical skills, I mean, hands-on skills, its examples are not many. Filippo, I don't know if you are.
I would like to elaborate a couple of points. I think one very important one is the costing. I mean, sometimes you hear about these technologies, and the first reaction is who's going to pay. The issue is that these technologies will help you save a lot of money in terms of buying equipment or using equipment, which can be, for example, centralized in one single schools in a region instead of being deployed in all schools. So if you use this type of technologies well, you can save money and invest it in parallel. So you can maintain a balance in terms of funding, but having quite sophisticated software. In terms of practical skills, of course, I fully agree with Fabio. There's a limit to what you can do using digital teaching and learning environments, but this can actually complement. If you take an example, for example, for assessment, you may, if you have something simple like electronics or some electrical exercises that you can do at home with very basic equipment that you may have at home, learning technologies in supporting also practical skills development with this inevitable element that is still you need to learn by doing in many qualifications. That's impossible.
Yeah, and in many cases, it comes down again to design. So understanding what you can do in many cases is not so much doing things in a radically new way. It's doing the same things, for example, at a distance by including different students. So it is really a matter of working with design. I would say design options.
Yeah.
I think if we have no more questions, I can show you the last, even more on the optimistic side. So we started rather pessimistic and we are now offensive. We know that especially for if you have to acquire not only the tools but the capacity to use these tools, so getting some courses as well, this can be expensive. This is interesting to note that virtually polio. Think of this is very interesting and very innovative. A way to students are requested to write instructions manuals together. So if you have a new thing, what's the best way to show that you know how that thing works than writing an instruction manual, for example, in another language? This is helping other people to learn and to teach digitally. Actually can be done through open and free tool, which is actually a positive note. And you can see some link. You might have to upgrade and digitalize existing content. You might have to develop new content. You can also use existing content and make it new for you. So actually you have millions, virtually millions of existing materials, content for actually any discipline. But still, the message there is that in many cases, very good quality for your most common language, but not only. And so that's an interesting option is to want to develop new content. And the third positive news is that teachers and students, but here let's talk about teachers and educators, can actually develop their digital literacy. So not only digital skills, but actually also a larger digital understanding of what it means to teach and lead by example in a digital society for free through very good courses. Here I put just one by the University of Edinburgh. Again, it's in English, but since it is all open educational resources, anybody can take it and translate it, for example, completely legally and completely for free. And this is a course where you can go and select one or two or more of these 23 things and just take them. One day after the other, you run an activity and actually you learn by doing what it means to actually teach and work in a digital society and through digital ways. And all of this, there is a plethora of free resources, free tool, and actually free courses as well that can be used. So this is one of the big powers of digital technology. Now I'm leaving you with two messages. Now the first message is dealing with, again, open educational resources, is that, for example, this set of slides that I've been using is itself an open educational resource. So if you find that some of these slides, even one or just one picture, can be useful, you want to use it, you can do it. You know, this is not copyright protected. This is copyleft protected. So it is released with a Creative Commons license. You can freely use it just by quoting where you took it, of course, but you can do whatever you want with it. You can put it in a book, in a course, even for commercial reasons. You can do whatever you want. So let's say this is also a way to transform knowledge into teaching content, which is actually something important. And the second thing on the right side, I'm doing a bit of a promotion of something we have been recently launching at ETF, is the community of innovative educators. Actually, it's an open international community where we are actually discussing these sort of things. So this morning we had, for example, a meeting, a round table with mainly Central Asian and Russian speakers, where we are exactly discussing how to make sure that we don't move towards cyborg teachers. So how to keep the losing can be a way also to lose a bit of the human touch, of course. So that is the link that I think you will get the slides, so you can click, register, and you're welcome to follow the activities of this community and to participate to you. I think you're muted. Filippo?
You couldn't hear me, did you?
No.
So that's a question from Dr. Najm there. He thanks for including the suggestion of including the web designer and librarian in the course design, but he asked, what about industry representative?
Well, I mean, I think it depends how long you want to see the design process. I think industry representative should be there at least in the first part, when it's about when the design process is about discussing and identifying what we want to teach and at which level. So in terms of competencies, and we know this is a big problem that industries often don't participate in these things, in these, let's say, in circles of design. When it comes to how you actually design a course, meaning what activities will be synchronous, what will be asynchronous, what will be your, let's say, which approach are you using? Are you using a co-design approach, collaborative approach, or you might decide to have an expert speaking and the students or the learner just contributing and commenting? You can decide that. I mean, having industry there is interesting, I would say, because it can get a lot of practical input. I would say it's the only thing is that I don't know how much industry representatives would be interested to get engaged there. So I have not seen that very often. So normally I see industry present in the beginning. So, you know, this is what we need to get out of this course. We need to get people able to do A, B, C, D. And then normally they go to the school or to the university. I think having industry representatives there would be good, especially people from human resources or people from skills development within industry. So it's a very good point. Thank you, Shah. Very good.
If you don't have any additional question, I would just add a couple of points, which actually is a bit redundant on something that we said already, but I think that these are the three most important things. And then, of course, if Fabio wants to have additional final messages, he can provide them as well. So I would just, I mean, there's one thing which is for me the most important, at least how I perceive it. It's really the risk of decreasing the quality of education. I know that's the priority for this point should be at policy level, and definitely, I mean, that's why we work with the ministerial people, ministries and director generals. That's one of our key messages. But I think all stakeholders involved in education should have these as one of their priorities, because it's up to the teachers to really understand when you see these inequalities in learning. So this is something very important. It shouldn't be left at the policy level. Says, okay, it's up to them, it's not our fault. I mean, it's really the work of the teachers for me to keep this under control. My second message, this is clearly mentioned by Fabio, I just want to repeat it, is there's a huge added value in establishing a community inside each school, because every teacher is going to be good at something different. You will have somebody who's very good in finding teaching materials, okay? So open online resources. There's going to be another teacher who's going to be very good in graphical tools. There's another going to be very good in facilitating because of his own personality. So especially when you enter in the learning process of using all these tools, it's so much difficult to do it on your own. So creating a community inside the schools probably is a condition sine qua non. So you can't do without if you really want to implement it. And for me, these are the two most important things when you really enter into this world, when you really try to establish a new way of teaching. So for my side, it's all. I would like to thank Fabio, of course, and Valentina, and all the participants for their questions and participation. And I wish you a very nice continuation of the day.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Bye.